Well, Poland is on a suicide mission, it seems, part of that crazy boondoggle of European countries that are trying to agitate for a permanent war against Russia. But as you just heard, Colonel Douglas Macgregor says NATO couldn't possibly go to war with Russia. They would lose in a heartbeat. They're not prepared. They're broke. They're falling apart. So why is Poland trying to poke the bear? Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk on Tuesday said during talks with Ukraine upon a possible peace deal that U.S. officials vowed that the U.S. be willing to take military action against Russia as part of this peace agreement if it violates any sort of future ceasefire. Then we heard from Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, saying Russia will be devastated. We will devastate Russia if they violate any sort of ceasefire agreement. We want to go after them. But Poland's not wasting any time. They're lining up now a new tranche of massive amounts of landmines that'll be sitting on the Polish border. Poland is ramping up this program to lay these anti-personnel mines on their eastern border, and it plans to deploy them along the eastern border and export them also to Ukraine. Of course, this is, if I'm not mistaken, a violation of like a decades-long agreement to not use these types of things. But okay, so Poland is girding its loins for a permanent war with Russia. Dr. Mike Krupa is the host of a brand new YouTube show and podcast called the DR Global Podcast. You can find it on YouTube. One of the, as I always say, the smartest man in all of Poland, and he joins us now. Mike, great to see you. Welcome back to the show. Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you, guys. Great to be back.
What do you make of this move by Poland? An economy that's in trouble, a people that are not interested in any kind of war with Russia. Why are the leaders in Poland really moving your country towards like a suicide mission?
Well, I think it's a narrative that's prevalent in all of Europe. You know, the quicker we're seeing the end of this war, I think the end is near than it was, a year or 2 years ago. The breakdown of the Ukrainian army, the acceleration of the Russian moves on the front, and the general, degradation of Europe militarily and economically, plus the pressure with all the chaos obviously emanating from it, but nonetheless the pressure coming from the United States to end this war, basically has thrown a wrench into this entire operation of let's try and strategically weaken Russia. And one of the things that, the governing elites in Europe want to keep is to at least make sure that the public opinion in each of these countries, the major European Union countries, continues to believe that Russia is on the verge of invading the rest of Europe, which is obviously nonsense. It was always nonsense. It behooves, I don't even know how to respond to such a claim because it's just so ridiculous. I mean, there's more rationality to the claim, I think, that Maduro was exporting drugs to the United States than that Russia is planning an invasion of Europe, even though that first statement is also absurd. But I think it's a desperate act. I think it's throwing money into garbage, obviously. In Poland, we also have our own mini military industrial complex. People need to make money. And the company that is going to apparently supply these anti-personnel mines, from what I read in that Reuters report, is a Polish company, so there's a lot of money to be made. But as I said, it's performative actions to keep the public opinion, or at least a segment of the public opinion, that voted for the governing coalition currently in power in Poland, to make them continue stew in that, soup of fear of Russia, and make sure that the level of that fear doesn't go down in any way.
How is life in Poland right now for the average Polish person, given this war that's been on your doorstep for many years now? Well,
like in other parts of Europe, we're dealing with inflation. Obviously, that's been a kicker in the ass, so to say. Unfortunately, we've been flooded with a couple of million of Ukrainian migrants, sometimes called refugees, which has brought significant burdens not only to our economy, to our housing market, but in the most fundamental areas, such as internal security. If you look at the crime statistics in Poland right now, Ukrainians, unfortunately, are on the top when it comes to foreigners. So that hasn't made Poland safer. We've obviously given up any pretense of being a responsible power in this region of Europe. we should be a power that is, facilitating negotiations between Russia and Ukraine and the United States, just like, Viktor Orban is doing in Hungary. Robert Fico is trying to do in Slovakia, and we have a turn in politics, obviously, right now in the Czech Republic, with Andrej Babiš coming to power and reasserting Czech sovereignty in the face of the behemoth in Brussels, the EU, and taking a strong stand against this pro-war radicalism that has engulfed Europe. So in Poland, unfortunately, we're in a situation where nobody in the public opinion in the polls show this, doesn't want a war with Russia. The negative attitude towards Ukrainians in Poland, every single poll in the last 2 years is confirming that this negativity is only on the rise. But the government doesn't seem to care because, unfortunately, there are still people in Poland who, don't realize that there has been an internet revolution. They still take their news from the mainstream media, unfortunately. And that populace is the one that still gives the votes to the liberal governing coalition. Obviously, they're mostly boomer types, so they're slowly moving to that other world, so to say. But unfortunately, there's still a voice in Polish politics. But once that generational shift happens, by way of information, I just want to tell you that in the last poll that was conducted in Poland, Grzegorz Braun's Confederation of the Polish Crown Party has 11%. So that's actually a pretty good sign because the Confederation of the Polish Crown is the most, as you well know, you've had Grzegorz on your show, consequentially anti-war, pro-sovereignty, anti-globalist party in Poland. So their rise is a good sign for things to come. It definitely shows that especially the young under 40 electorate is voting completely differently than their parents, which is a very good sign.
So can I say it bluntly then? Are young people in Poland, they've had enough, they do not want war?
Of course. There is no constituency for war among the under 40 crowd in Poland. There is no constituency for open borders, and I would even say there is no strong constituency for the maintaining of the European Union, at least in its current form, and Poland's continued presence in the European Union. There's many more Eurosceptics in the under 40 crowd that has, that uses basically the instruments that we have on the internet of dissident media, of alternative media sites, and doesn't rely on their information space to be their television set and basically the two or three two private, one state-owned channels that basically feed the same BS with some degrees of difference, but not much. So, yeah, there is hope. But as I said, despite the problems, you will not find in general a constituency in Poland for war with Russia. That's for sure. So, the government even realizes this because they'll say, we're not going to send any troops to Ukraine. We're going to sort of bandwagon with the rest of Europe, but at least we're showing that we're strong, that we're assertive. So we're going to place, a couple of 100,000 anti-personnel mines on the border with Kaliningrad and so on, which is kind of ironic if you think about it, because the former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, who, by the way, is hanging out right now from what I saw with his girlfriend in some very high-end opera, he actually made some statements back in 2024 where he said that, and this was actually stated in Poland, he said that certain areas of the current makeup of the Polish Republic are actually Ukrainian territories. And that stirred a lot of indignation and anger, even from the Polish government, which demanded a retraction. But also in 2022, Kuleba presented then Secretary of State Blinken in his office with a historic map of Ukraine that actually included two current Polish cities. So there is an appetite among Ukrainian nationalists for certain areas of eastern and southeastern Poland to be returned to Ukraine. They claim it's historical Ukrainian lands. So I would argue if we were to put any anti-personnel mines, we should put them on the border with Ukraine and not with Russia and Belarus.
Oh, wow. You can make some headlines with that one. But it's hard to argue with that. Doctor, we'll get you out of here on this energy issues all across Europe. You're seeing the collapse of Germany right now. You're seeing protests from Paris to Brussels today. I mean, farmers have had enough of these globalist pigs. What is the energy situation like for you guys in Poland right now?
Well, we've got news that an American company we've actually received the blessing from the European Union. This was big news recently in Poland that we're going to finally have our own atomic energy factory. It's going to be built by an American company. I forgot which American company at this point. It's kind of late here in Poland. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
But we realized that there's this undercurrent of thinking that, yeah, Russian gas was cheap, but we had to cut ourselves off because everybody else was doing it, and we don't want to be subservient to, the Russians in that regard. There's been a lot of talk about buying American Freedom Gas, LNG, bringing also it from Qatar. But the energy situation in Poland is basically the same as in the rest of Europe. So energy prices have gone up ever since the start of the war. The only sane person in that regard seems to be Viktor Orban, who basically plays a really hard-hitting game of realpolitik, because not only does he get cheap Russian gas, but he also gets exemptions from the United States to continue buying the cheap Russian gas. That's why I call, Viktor Orban the sort of virtuoso of realism in Europe, which he definitely is. So we're pretty much in the same, bandwagon as the rest of Europe when it comes to energy prices. I was surprised to see, well, not really surprised, but you probably heard the news that one of Volkswagen's sub-headquarters was actually closed down recently in Germany, which is like, really? Volkswagen is closing down in Germany? The first thing that comes to mind is, sure, more sanctions will definitely resolve this problem.
Right.
So in general, I guess we would say we have the same problems as the rest of Europe. The real estate market in Poland is actually, when it comes to prices, in the top 5, if not 3. So in that regard, the effects of mass immigration, unfortunately, are hitting us pretty hard. But all in all, I guess we would say same problems, just more of a wider country, I guess, at least up until now.
Yeah. Dr. Mike Krupa, we hope you have a Merry Christmas there. Check out the new DR Global podcast, which you just launched, so people can check that out and subscribe and listen in. And thank you for staying up so late with us there. I think it's like 10:45 p.m. in Warsaw, Poland.
10:45 p.m. Indeed. Yeah. Thank you very much. Also, a blessed and Merry Christmas to you guys, and for all fans out there. All the information about my new podcast you can find on my Twitter. We launched today our first interview with Professor Richard Sakpa. So hope all to see you there, and hope we get good interconnectivity with all the anti-globalist dissidents out there in the world and in the United States. Thanks once again.
Yeah, give him a good follow. Go listen to, like I said, Dr. Mike Krupa, one of the smartest people in Poland, so, and the world for that matter. Dr. Krupa, always great to see you. Thank you so much. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, guys. Merry Christmas. Have a good one.
Thanks so much.